In the distant future, where galaxies span across endless stars, the Zorath Empire stood as one of the most powerful civilizations in the universe. The Empire's leaders were intelligent, cunning, and held a deep belief in their superiority. However, there was one thing they didn't understand: human beings. They saw humans as primitive, yet resilient species. To test this theory, the Zorath Royal Council planned a harmless prank. They would present a human diplomat, Eric Marshall, with their princess, an alien royal, Ilara, who was as beautiful as she was enigmatic. The plan was simple. Eric was to be greeted by Princess Ilara, handed over as a diplomatic gift, and the Royal Council would watch in amusement as the human tried to understand his honor. The Zorath believed the act would be enough to leave Eric speechless, confused, and most importantly, bowing to their power. As Eric walked into the Grand Palace on Zorath, he felt a mixture of awe and skepticism. The palace was unlike anything he had ever seen. Tall towers with crystal walls rose far into the sky. Strange, glowing symbols adorned every surface, and the air hummed with an unfamiliar energy. The Zorath were known for their technological marvels, but nothing prepared Eric for what he was about to encounter. Ilara, the princess, stood before him, a living testament to her people's beauty and strength. She was tall and elegant, with shimmering green skin that seemed to glow in the dim light of the palace hall. Her eyes, deep purple and sharp, held a certain mystery, a quiet intelligence that Eric couldn't help but be drawn to. She wore a regal gown made of delicate silver threads that seemed to shift colors with every movement. But what struck Eric the most was her presence. There was something about her that made him feel both uneasy and captivated at the same time. The alien officials around them looked on, eager to see how Eric would react. They had carefully planned this moment for weeks, hoping to watch the human stumble, unsure of how to respond to an alien princess. They imagined he would be intimidated, unsure of what to do with such an important figure. But Eric didn't feel fear. He had faced difficult situations before, and dealing with an alien princess didn't seem any different. He studied her carefully, noting the dignified way she carried herself. Instead of bowing to her as he might have expected from a royal figure, he nodded politely, offering his hand. "Princess Ilara," he said in his smooth, calm voice, "it's an honor to meet you." The Zorath officials froze for a moment. They had never expected such an answer. The human was supposed to cower in the presence of royalty, yet he had greeted her as an equal. They were confused. Ilara, too, was surprised by his reaction. She had expected the human to show more fear, more respect, more distance. But instead, there was none of that. His simple gesture was honest and direct, something she had not seen in the polished, controlled world of her royal upbringing. For a brief moment, she felt a flicker of something new, a curiosity. But she quickly pushed it away, reminding herself of her duty and the expectations of her people. The prank was still meant to be harmless. Eric was still a human, and she was still a princess, bound by the rules of her empire. "I hope your travels to Zorath have been pleasant," she replied, her voice smooth and controlled, though there was an edge of something more beneath it. Something real, something unspoken. Eric smiled, noticing the way her eyes momentarily softened. "They have, thank you. But I must admit I didn't expect such a warm welcome." He motioned around them, indicating the vast halls and the elegant decor. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen." Ilara's lips twitched slightly, though amused, but she said nothing. The Zorath officials, however, seemed to grow more uncomfortable with every word exchanged. This wasn't the reaction they had expected at all. Eric and Ilara continued their conversation, their words polite but carrying an undercurrent of curiosity. As the minutes passed, it became clear that their meeting wasn't the awkward, uncomfortable situation the Royal Council had hoped for. Instead, Eric's respect for Alara and her growing interest in him were becoming more obvious with every exchange. But as the conversation moved on, Alara couldn't help but notice something strange. As much as she tried to keep her composure, there was something magnetic about Eric, something human that she couldn't quite place. His gaze wasn't one of fear, nor was it the type of adoration she was used to receiving from others. It was more honest, more direct, and strangely comforting. The official stood in silence, growing frustrated. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They had wanted to embarrass the human, to make him feel insignificant. Instead, he was treating their princess as though she were just another person. And as they watched Alara's reaction, they realized something. Perhaps the human race wasn't so easily intimidated after all. For Eric, the moment didn't seem all that strange. He had dealt with people from many different backgrounds and cultures. The way the Zorath had presented Alara wasn't intimidating to him. It was simply a cultural exchange. What mattered more was who she was as a person, not her royal status. And in that moment, he began to wonder just how different their worlds really were. As the conversation ended, Alara led him out of the palace to show him more of Zorath's wonders. The Zorath officials, still in shock, watched them leave, unsure of what had just occurred. What was meant to be a harmless prank had become something else entirely. What no one had anticipated was the possibility of a real connection between a human and a princess, a connection that would go on to change the course of both their lives. As days passed on the Zorath homeworld, Eric and Alara found themselves spending more and more time together. What had started as a diplomatic meeting quickly transformed into something neither of them had expected. The Royal Council, who had orchestrated the prank to mock the human diplomat, now watched in silence, bewildered by the unexpected turn of events. Eric and Alara were not just sharing pleasantries, they were genuinely connecting on a level neither of them had anticipated. At first, their conversations had been about formal matters, Zorathian politics, human diplomacy, the ongoing trade, agreements between their species, but soon the subjects became more personal. Eric, with his calm demeanor and curiosity about the world, began asking Alara questions that no royal diplomat would ever dare to ask. He wanted to know about her life, her dreams, her desires. Alara, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she never had before, even to her own people. "Alara," Eric asked one evening as they walked through the palace gardens, "what's it like being a princess? I mean, everyone sees the crown, the jewels, the power, but what does it feel like on the inside?" Alara paused for a moment, her sharp purple eyes glinting in the moonlight as she turned to him. "You think I'm like the stories, don't you? Untouchable. Perfect. I've never known anything else. My whole life has been a series of responsibilities, demands, and expectations," she replied, her voice soft but heavy with the weight of her words. Eric nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I can't imagine living with that kind of pressure. It must be exhausting." A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at Ilara's lips. "You're not afraid to ask questions that most people would never dare," she said, the words almost more of a statement than a question. Eric smiled in return. "I guess I've never been afraid of the truth. Maybe that's why I became a diplomat. I wanted to understand the real story, not just the one everyone tells you." Alara looked at him closely, her curiosity piqued once again. In the quiet, sprawling gardens of the palace, with the stars of Zorath's twin moons shining above them, she found herself feeling something she hadn't expected. Something unfamiliar. It wasn't the awe or reverence that she was accustomed to as a princess, nor was it the obligation to maintain a dignified image. It was something raw and honest. She admired his unguarded nature, something that was so foreign to her in a world that prized control and appearances above all. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," she admitted softly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Eric looked at her, surprised by the openness in her voice. "You're not like what I imagined either," he replied, his words sincere. I thought you would be more like the stories they tell, reserved, distant." Ilara chuckled, though it held a hint of sadness. "That's what I've been trained to be, but deep down, I'm more than just a princess." Eric smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. I'd like to get to know the real you, not just the royal persona." Their walks through the gardens became a regular occurrence. Each day they would share stories about their lives, their cultures, and their worlds. They discovered they had far more in common than they ever imagined. Eric shared stories of growing up on Earth, of simple joys like playing soccer and hiking through the forests near his childhood home. Ilara, in turn, told him about her training as a leader, the years spent learning the art of diplomacy, the strict traditions of her royal family, and the sense of duty that was drummed into her from childhood. One evening, as they sat on a terrace overlooking the glowing city below, Ilara confessed something she had never told anyone before. "I've always wondered what it would be like to be free, not bound by expectations, not constantly serving the Empire's needs, just living my own life. But that would never be possible for someone like me." Eric turned to her, his expression serious. "I don't think it's impossible, Ilara. I think everyone deserves the chance to live their own life, to make their own choices. But it's hard. I know that." Ilara's eyes softened as she met his gaze. "You don't understand. My whole life, I've been told what to do, what to think, who to marry, how to rule. My choices were never really my own." She let out a long sigh. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever get to choose anything for myself." Eric reached out, placing his hand on hers gently. "You've got more power than you think. You can still choose, even if it's hard." The touch was light, almost casual, but Ilara felt a spark of warmth where their skin met. It was strange, but in that simple gesture, she felt a sense of comfort and reassurance that she hadn't realized she was missing. For the first time, she felt as though her choices mattered, not because of her title, but because of who she was as a person. From that day on, their bond only grew stronger. The palace officials, who had once watched their interaction with amusement, now grew uneasy. They had hoped the human diplomat would remain a passive participant in their political games. But Eric was proving to be more than that. He was not just a pawn in their game. He was someone who had forged a connection with Ilara, someone who was making her question everything she had known. As the days turned into weeks, Ilara found herself in a constant state of internal conflict. She couldn't deny the growing feelings she had for Eric, and she couldn't shake the realization that he was different from anyone she had ever met. But what did it all mean? Could she truly break free from the chains of her royal duties? Was there even a way out? Eric, for his part, had no illusions about the complexity of the situation. He knew that his feelings for Ilara could never be simple. She was a princess, and he was just a human diplomat. The differences between them were vast, and the challenges they faced were real. But as he looked at her, his heart told him something different. He didn't know how, but he knew they were meant to be a part of each other's lives, and so the unexpected bond between the human diplomat and the alien princess continued to grow. Neither of them knew where it would lead, but one thing was clear: they were no longer simply playing the roles assigned to them. They were beginning to write their own story. The days of peaceful talks and quiet walks through the palace gardens were quickly interrupted. Ilara had become accustomed to the safety and routine of palace life, but she had never truly been free. Beneath the calm exterior of Zorath's beautiful city, there were forces at work that sought to control not only the empire, but also the princess herself. One evening, as Ilara and Eric sat on the terrace overlooking the city's lights, they were approached by a member of the royal guard, a man named Varric. His face was grim, and his voice low, carrying a weight of urgency. "Princess Ilara," Varric said, bowing slightly, "there's trouble. The council has called a meeting. They want you back now." Ilara felt a sudden chill run through her. She knew what that meant. The royal council was not pleased with how things were unfolding. They had sent her here to meet with Eric as a diplomatic gesture, but what had started as a prank was quickly turning into something much more complicated. "What do they want with me?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced in her chest. "They want you to return immediately," Varric continued, his eyes flickering toward Eric. "There are decisions to be made. The council is growing restless with your absence." Ilara stood up slowly, her mind racing. The council had always expected her to be the perfect princess, obedient to their will. They had never anticipated that she would form a bond with someone like Eric, someone so different from the leaders of Zorath. "I will go with you," Ilara said, her tone firm. "But I need a moment." Varric hesitated but nodded, stepping aside to give her some space. "Eric," Ilara said softly, turning to him, "I don't know what's going to happen. The council doesn't like the direction things are going. They won't let me choose freely. They never have." Eric looked at her, his expression serious but filled with concern. "What are they planning to do with you?" Ilara shook her head. "I don't know, but they'll find a way to separate us. They don't believe in the kind of bond we have. They'll see it as a weakness, a distraction from my duties." Eric reached out, taking her hand in his. "We'll figure this out. We've faced challenges before. We'll face this one together." Ilara looked down at their joined hands and felt a surge of hope. In the time they had spent together, she had come to trust Eric completely. His support was unwavering, and in that moment, she realized how much she wanted to build a future with him, no matter the cost. But as they shared a quiet moment, a cold reality settled in. The Zorath Royal Council was not an organization that allowed anyone to defy its authority. Ilara's life had been shaped by their rules, and breaking free from them would be more difficult than either of them could imagine. Later that evening, Ilara was escorted to the palace's central meeting hall where the council had gathered. Eric was not allowed to join her, much to his frustration. He had always felt like an outsider on Zorath, but now he understood how deeply ingrained the political structure was. He had no choice but to wait. Inside the grand hall, the members of the royal council stood at attention, their stern faces betraying nothing. They were tall, imposing beings with skin that shimmered like polished stone. The leader of the council, Prime Minister Thalos, stood at the head of the room, his sharp eyes fixed on Ilara as she entered, his gaze calculating as if measuring her every step. "Princess Ilara," Thalos began, his voice deep and authoritative, "we have called you here because your actions have caused concern. The diplomatic meeting with the human has gone far beyond what was intended. The council will not tolerate this kind of distraction." Ilara stood tall, her chin raised high. She refused to let her fear show. "I did what was necessary. Eric has proven to be a valuable ally. His presence here is not a distraction, but an opportunity for both of our people." Thalos's eyes narrowed. "The council believes differently. Your duties are to Zorath first. You have been chosen to uphold the interests of the Empire. These human relationships are nothing more than a passing curiosity. We expect you to return to your royal duties immediately." Ilara's heart sank. She had known this would happen, but the weight of it still struck her like a blow. Her life had always been planned for her, every moment dictated by the Empire's will. The thought of returning to that life, a life of control and restrictions, filled her with dread. "I will not return," Ilara said, her voice firm, though it trembled with emotion. "I have made my decision. I will not be a pawn in your political games any longer." A tense silence filled the room. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unprepared for such a bold defiance. Thalos stepped forward, his voice cold and measured. "You will do as you are told, Princess. You have no other choice." "I have a choice," Ilara replied, her voice unwavering. "And I choose to live my life for myself. Not for the Empire. Not for you." Thalos's expression darkened. "Then you leave us no choice. If you refuse to return, there will be consequences. The council will remove you from power. You will no longer be the princess of Zorath." The words cut deep, but Ilara didn't flinch. She had known this moment was coming. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving behind everything she had known, but she was no longer afraid. She had found something worth fighting for. A life with Eric, where she could make her own choices. "I'm ready to face whatever comes," Ilara said, her voice filled with determination. Thalos's eyes flashed with anger, but he said nothing more. He turned away, signaling that the meeting was over. Ilara stood there, her heart pounding, knowing that the path ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in her life, she felt free. Free from the expectations that had bound her. Free from the chains of tradition that had held her captive. As Ilara walked back to where Eric was waiting, she could feel the weight of the decision she had made. It wasn't going to be easy. But she knew one thing for certain. She would not let anyone take away the life she had chosen. Eric was standing by the door when she arrived, his expression full of concern. "What happened?" he asked, his voice soft. "I made my choice," Ilara said, looking him in the eye, "and I won't go back, no matter what they do." Eric smiled, his eyes filled with relief and pride. "Then we face this together. Whatever comes next, we're in it together." And with that, the two of them walked out of the palace, knowing that they had made their stand. The galaxy might be filled with obstacles, but for the first time, Ilara felt ready to face them, not as a princess, but as herself. The air in the palace was thick with tension. Ilara had made her decision, but now the consequences of that choice were about to unfold. The Royal Council had given her an ultimatum: return to her duties or face removal from her position. They had made it clear that no princess could defy their command without facing severe punishment. But Ilara was determined, and she would not allow fear to control her any longer. After the meeting with the council, Ilara returned to her chambers, her mind spinning with thoughts of what was to come. The council had not taken her defiance lightly, and she knew that soon they would send agents to bring her back, possibly by force. The walls of the palace, which had once felt like a symbol of her power, now felt like a prison. As night fell, Ilara met with Eric in secret. She had not told him everything yet, but he had sensed the change in her demeanor, the fire in her eyes, the way her jaw clenched when she spoke. It was clear that something had shifted inside her. They needed to leave. "Ilara, what's happening?" Eric asked, his voice low, a mix of concern and curiosity. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening before speaking in a hurried whisper. "The council will not let me go. If I stay here, I will be forced to return to my duties, and everything I've fought for will be lost. We have to leave. We can't stay here any longer." Eric nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "You're not alone in this. I'll go with you, wherever you need to go." Ilara looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never thought she would find someone who understood her like Eric did. Someone who saw her not as a princess or a symbol, but as a person with hopes, fears, and desires. And now she was ready to take the next step. They spent the night preparing. Ilara gathered a few belongings, including her most precious items, her royal insignia, a small locket from her mother, and a few clothes. She knew that everything else in the palace was expendable. What mattered now was her freedom, her life, with Eric, and the future they could build together. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke through the palace windows, they made their move. Quietly, they slipped through the halls, avoiding the royal guards who patrolled the corridors. The palace, once a place of grandeur and security, now felt like a labyrinth of secrets and shadows. They moved swiftly, their footsteps echoing in the silence of the early hours. Alara's heart raced as they reached the palace gates. She had never felt so alive, so free. But she also knew that this was just the beginning of their journey. The royal council would not let them go without a fight, and there would be dangers ahead. Still, she was determined. She was no longer a prisoner of tradition. She was taking control of her destiny. As they stepped outside the palace walls, Alara took a deep breath. The cool morning air filled her lungs, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly breathing. The city of Zorath stretched. Out before them, a place full of life and stories, but it was no longer her home, not in the way it once had been. "Where do we go now?" Eric asked, looking at her with that reassuring smile of his. Alara glanced around, her mind already turning. They needed to leave Zorath, and fast. The Empire was vast, and there were many places where they could hide, but they couldn't stay on this planet for long. If they were caught, there would be no escape. But for now, all she wanted was to be free. Free from the expectations, the pressure, and the people who had never cared about her happiness. "There's a remote planet," Alara said, thinking quickly. "It's far from the center of the Empire, a place where people live quietly, far away from politics. We can hide there, start over. I know it well." Eric nodded. "Then that's where we'll go." With no time to lose, they made their way to the outskirts of the city, where a small private transport ship awaited them. It had been arranged by a few of Alara's loyal allies, those who had once served her family but who now saw the truth about the council's corruption. The ship was small, but it was fast, perfect for escaping undetected. As they boarded the ship, Alara felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. This was it. There was no turning back now. She glanced at Eric, who was already at the controls, his hands steady as he prepped the ship for takeoff. She took a seat beside him, her heart pounding in her chest. "You ready?" Eric asked, looking at her with a reassuring smile. Alara took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm ready." With a press of a button, the ship lifted off the ground, rising into the sky. As they soared higher and higher, leaving the city of Zorath behind, Alara couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. She was no longer a princess bound by tradition. She was a woman, free to choose her own future. The journey to the remote planet was long, but it gave them time to talk, to reflect on the journey ahead. They shared stories of their worlds, their hopes, and their fears. Alara found herself laughing, more than she had in years, enjoying the simple moments with Eric. She realized that it wasn't just about escaping the Empire. It was about the new life they were building together, free from the constraints that had once defined her. When they finally reached the remote planet, Alara was overwhelmed with relief. The planet was beautiful, covered in lush forests, tranquil lakes, and peaceful villages. It was the complete opposite of the bustling, demanding life she had left behind on Zorath. Here, she could live on her own terms. They landed the ship in a secluded area, far from any major settlements. Alara looked out at the landscape, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. As they stepped off the ship, Eric turned to her, a grin on his face. "Well, Princess, welcome to your new life." Alara smiled, her eyes bright with excitement. "It's not just my new life. It's ours. Together." With that, they walked into the peaceful unknown, ready to build a future that was no longer dictated by anyone else's rules. It was their time now, and nothing could take that away. The days on the remote planet passed peacefully, far away from the tensions of Zorath. The small village they had settled in was simple and quiet, the people kind and welcoming. It was the life Alara had always dreamed of, one without the pressure of royal duties, without the constant eyes of the Empire upon her. Here, in the lush forests and open fields, she could breathe freely and live at her own pace. Alara had never imagined that she would find herself living like this, so far from her past. For the first time, she was living without the constant weight of expectations. There was no throne to sit on, no counsel to please. It was just her and Eric building a life together. One morning, as Alara and Eric worked together in their small garden, tending to the plants and preparing for the harvest, Alara felt a sudden wave of nausea wash over her. It came quickly and unexpectedly, and for a moment she paused, her hand on her stomach. Eric looked over at her, his brow furrowing with concern. "Alara, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. She nodded, though the feeling lingered. "I'm fine. Just a little tired, I think. Maybe I haven't been resting enough." Eric didn't seem convinced. "You've been working non-stop since we got here. Maybe you need to take it easy for a while." Alara smiled faintly, brushing the hair from her face. "I suppose you're right. I'll take a break." But as she sat down on the bench outside, their small cottage, the thought that had been creeping into her mind for days, became clearer. She had felt different for some time now, and her body was sending her signals that she couldn't ignore. After a few moments of quiet reflection, Alara made up her mind. She stood up and walked into their cottage, where she kept a small medical kit she had brought with her from Zorath. She had learned enough about medicine during her royal training to know what to look for, and after checking herself, Alara realized what she had suspected. She was pregnant. Her heart raced as the realization sank in. A part of her had always imagined that she would have children one day, but she had never thought it would happen like this, far from her family, away from the palace with no royal title to give her status. But another part of her, the part that had learned to live without the constraints of her former life, felt a deep sense of joy. Eric had always supported her, always encouraged her to make her own choices. And now, this was her choice. She didn't have to follow anyone's expectations. This child would be hers, and she would raise them on her own terms. Later that evening, when the sky was painted with the soft colors of sunset, Alara sat with Eric at their small table. The fire crackled gently in the hearth, and the smell of the evening meal filled the air. As they ate, Alara felt a nervous flutter in her chest. It was time to tell Eric what she had discovered. "Eric," she began, her voice quieter than usual, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from his meal, his eyes kind and attentive. "What is it, Alara?" "I'm pregnant," she said simply, watching his face carefully for any sign of shock or disbelief. For a moment, there was silence. Eric's eyes widened slightly, but then his lips curled into a smile. He set down his plate and reached across the table to take her hand. "Alara, that's amazing," he said, his voice filled with warmth and tenderness. "We're going to be parents." Alara felt a surge of emotion, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. She had never thought this would happen, especially not under the circumstances they had faced to get here. But now, looking at Eric, she felt certain that they would face this new chapter together. She had chosen this life, and now they would choose to raise this child as a team. "I didn't expect this," Alara admitted, her voice soft. "But now that I know, I feel like it's the right thing. It's our future. We'll raise them here in this peaceful place. No royal titles, no expectations from anyone else. Just us and our child." Eric smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "It's the right thing. I know it is. We'll give them a life full of love, full of choices, just like we've chosen for ourselves." Alara looked down at her hands, a small, laugh escaping her lips. I never imagined that I would be a mother like this. I thought it would be so different, more grand, more formal, but now it feels right. I want to raise this child in a world where they can make their own decisions, where they aren't bound by tradition or rules. I want them to know that their choices matter. Eric nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. We'll make sure they know that, Ilara. We'll give them everything we can. As the days passed, Ilara's pregnancy became more evident. She found herself feeling tired more often, but the joy of the growing life inside her filled her with a sense of purpose. She and Eric worked together to prepare for the arrival of their child, building a small nursery in one of the spare rooms of their cottage. They made plans for the future, imagining what it would be like to raise their family in this quiet, peaceful place, far from the pressures of her past life. One evening, as they sat together beneath the stars, Ilara's hand resting on her growing belly, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had chosen this life, not just for herself, but for her child as well. She had chosen to live without the constraints of royalty, without the expectations of the council. She had chosen to live freely, with love, and with the freedom to make her own choices. And now, she was about to begin the greatest adventure of all, motherhood. Ilara, Eric said softly, his voice filled with wonder as he looked at her. I can't wait to meet our child. Ilara smiled, her heart overflowing with love. Neither can I, she said, resting her head on his shoulder. Neither can I. And so their new life began, not as a princess and a diplomat, but as two people who had chosen each other, and now would choose to raise their family together, free from the expectations of a world that had never understood them. The peaceful days on the remote planet were a welcome escape from the chaos of Zorath, but Ilara and Eric knew their past would eventually catch up with them. The galaxy was vast, and word of Ilara's defiance would spread. The Royal Council would not let her go so easily. The decision she had made, to leave her royal duties behind and live a life of freedom with Eric, would not be without consequences. Months passed, and as Ilara's pregnancy advanced, she and Eric continued to settle into their new life. They built a home together, finding joy in the simple things, growing their own food, exploring the nearby forests, and planning for the future. It was a life Ilara had never imagined for herself, but it was one she had chosen. It felt like home. But deep down, Ilara knew the Empire would not let her go forever. It was only a matter of time before the Council sent someone to find her, to bring her back. And as the weeks passed, the first signs of that inevitability began to appear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ilara and Eric sat together on their porch, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the sky. They had been talking about their plans for the future, discussing the ways they would raise their child, when they heard the unmistakable hum of a ship in the distance. Ilara stood up, her heart racing. It's them, she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Eric's eyes widened. We need to hide, now! But it was too late. The ship, sleek and dark, descended from the sky, landing just a short distance from their home. Ilara felt a wave of dread wash over her. She knew who it was. She knew they had come for her. Eric quickly grabbed her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. We'll face them together, he said, his voice steady. As they walked toward the ship, the door slid open, revealing a figure dressed in black armor, the kind worn by the Imperial enforcers. The soldiers stepped out, their helmet glinting in the fading light. Ilara of Zorath. The soldier's voice was cold and mechanical. You are under arrest by order of the Royal Council. Return with us now. Ilara stood tall, her gaze unwavering. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, she felt a surge of defiance. She was no longer the princess bound by duty. She was a woman who had chosen her own path, a mother who had chosen to raise her child in a world of her own making. "I will not go back," Elara said, her voice strong. "I have made my choice, and I will not be forced into a life I don't want." The soldier's voice remained stern. "You have no choice. The council's orders are clear. Come with us peacefully, and no harm will come to you." Eric stepped forward, standing by Elara's side. "She's not going anywhere," he said firmly. "And neither are we." The enforcer hesitated for a moment, seemingly unsure of how to respond. It was rare that anyone defied the council's orders so openly, but this human, Eric, was unlike any other. The soldier's hand hovered over their weapon, but they did not draw it. "We don't want to fight," the soldier said, their voice softened slightly. "But we are under orders." Elara took a step closer to the soldier, her eyes filled with determination. "If you think I'm going to return to Zorath to live a life of chains, you're wrong. I've chosen my future. I'm free now, and no one will take that away from me." The soldier paused, their gaze shifting between Elara and Eric. Finally, they lowered their weapon. "The council will not forgive this," the enforcer said, their voice tinged with regret. "But we will let you go. For now." Eric and Elara exchanged a glance, both of them surprised by the soldier's decision. They had expected a battle, but instead the enforcer turned and walked back to the ship, pausing only once to look back at them. "This isn't over," the soldier said before boarding the ship, "but we'll give you time. Just remember, you can never outrun the Empire forever." The ship lifted off, disappearing into the night sky, leaving Elara and Eric standing in the quiet, empty landscape. Elara let out a deep breath, her body trembling with relief. They had been given a chance, but for how long? "I thought we'd have to fight," Eric said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I didn't expect them to just let us go." Elara turned to him, a determined look on her face. "This isn't over yet. The council will not let us go easily. But we've proven something tonight. We will not be forced back into their control. They may come for us again, but I won't run. I'll fight for the life we've chosen." Eric nodded, his expression resolute. "Then we'll fight together. Whatever comes next, we face it as a team." And so, the quiet life Elara and Eric had built together was interrupted once again. But instead of fear, there was a new sense of resolve. Elara had chosen freedom, and she would fight for it, no matter what the Empire threw at her. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Elara knew one thing for sure. She would not allow the Empire to take away the life she had chosen. She was no longer a princess. She was a mother, a partner, and a fighter. And no matter what, she would stand by her choices. As they stood together under the stars, the future seemed vast and open before them. Elara and Eric knew that they could face whatever came their way, as long as they faced it together. The Empire might have all the power in the galaxy, but they had something more powerful: each other.